This is Paul Nobles, and I just wanted to run through with you guys this image that we use. This is the basis for the third part of my presentation in live seminars, and this is the calorie wave method. And the wave method is a different approach to fat loss because, as you can sort of see, most of the arrows are pointing up most of the way. We're trying to get work capacity up. We're trying to fuel the things that you do and ultimately get you to thrive. So in this instance, the one thing that's not represented is how most people come to us. And so let's say that they're eating, they think that, paleo or eating clean and training dirty, those are all the buzzwords. They might be at 1,500 to 1,800 calories even as really active individuals, right? And so their total daily energy expenditure, which is sort of the number that's represented on the Eat Perform calculator. If you haven't seen that, you might want to go to our site and check that out because it will not only run through your calories or what your calories should be based on your level of activity, but it also give you how much protein you should be eating, fats and carbohydrates to kind of see the results that you want. But here's the key point here though. If you're starting off at 1,500 and 1,800 calories, what you really are going to struggle to do is to get to a deeper deficit. And at that point, what most people are doing is sort of addressing like water levels in their body. And so you'll also be kind of digging into some tissue. You'll atrophy a bit. And so you're always better off kind of cutting from a lower number, okay? And so one of the things that we try to introduce people to is that it's actually the period when they're not dieting that's almost more important as it relates to the effectiveness of their calorie deficit once they try to cut. So in this instance, we have 3 to 6 months where somebody might go from 1,500 to 1,800. And trust me, this might sound crazy because a lot of you have been kind of tearing your hair out for a long time trying to get fat loss, right? But if you find out that you've been eating 1,500 to 1,800 calories and you were supposed to be eating 2,500 calories, once you start eating an adequate amount of food, it's actually kind of addicting because, first of all, you don't necessarily need to gain weight. We can walk through that a little bit, but we talk about that in a lot of our articles. Our coaches certainly walk through that with people on a daily basis. So let's say that somebody was eating 1,500 to 1,800 calories and we get them up to 2,500 calories. Usually that'll take roughly, I'd say, anywhere from 5 to 10 weeks, depending on how good of an athlete that person is. And how cautious they want to be. Obviously, for a lot of people, they're not looking to gain weight. We wouldn't necessarily think that they would need to gain weight. But if you're, like I said, kind of dehydrated and things of this nature, you could probably expect, 3 to 5 pounds, depending on whether you're a female or a male, because that's just kind of natural. And that's sort of what low carbohydrates do. And so they'll kind of dry you out. So for 3 to 6 months, we sort of get this person at a higher calorie point, and then we take them down. Now, the question becomes is why 2,100, 1,800, and 1,500? Well, when you look at the average is roughly 1,900 calories. And so we're bringing this athlete down 600 calories throughout the time period, which is, as I'm pointing out here, 8 weeks. And so what we want to see the athlete do is lose 8 pounds in that 8 weeks. And so, for instance, in this instance, let's say that she was a 150-pound female and she lost 8 pounds, let's just say 9 to round it up. What would end up happening is she would end up losing 6% body fat. And so that's sort of the number there, as long as she can kind of keep her muscle. And as long as you're kind of going slow, that's usually not an issue. And so what we do is we have the athlete start off with 2,100 on the days that she would be working out. So she's fueling the days that she works out. 1,800 is sort of an active rest day. It would be the day that you do yoga, something of that nature. And then 1,500 are the days that you're getting to a deficit. Okay, now what a lot of people try to do is they try to game the system and they try to work out all the time, right? And so they think, well, if I can just work out a lot, I can be at 2100. The problem is that if you're at 2100 too often, it sort of messes with your deficit days. And I talk about this a little bit in our case studies article related to calorie wave method, is that when you're cutting, you pretty much kind of need to focus on that deficit and just trying to stay about par on your workouts. And so you may need to actually have more rest days. So if you were taking 2 rest days, you might need 3 rest days. And so ultimately what that ends up doing is changing the average. But what we try to encourage athletes to do is to work out normally, right? And as long as they were eating 2,500 calories most of the time, and then they move into the wave method, then ultimately we make adjustments from there. But the most interesting part, I think, for most people is going to be how this looks as the athlete starts to expand their work capacity. And what you're seeing on the top end, there's 2,500, 2,700, and 2,900. What that represents is the times that the athlete isn't dieting, right? The 2,300, 2,500, that's the top end of the numbers when they actually are cutting. So in this instance, some people, let's say somebody was 21% and it was a female and she got down to 15%, she may only need one of these 8-week cycles, right? And so what we're sort of pointing out to people is a very different way than the way that they normally diet, right? What they normally do is just go to one really low number, let's say 1,500 calories, and then they sort of get stuck there. That's why the athlete was stuck there for a long time, and we needed to reverse diet them up to this 2,500 calorie number. So now she loses 6% body fat, she's 15%. She never needs to really do this again, okay? Because she should be able to eat an adequate amount of food, adding work capacity along the way and becoming a better athlete. So this sort of begs the question, well, what if I'm not like this massive athlete or a games athlete or an Olympian or something of that nature? You don't need to be a massive athlete to expand your work capacity or even expand your caloric numbers. In fact, I think that's the goal of what we're trying to do here, because whether you're a runner, whether you just exercise casually, you want to constantly get better at it. You want to constantly thrive. And so this is the formula that we use. And like I said, what you're going to be focused on is periodic days where you're up, kind of that middle day, and then sort of the lower day. And, depending on whether you're working with our coaches or whether you're doing it alone, I think you'll already see this is very different than what, you've done in the past. And as long as your macronutrients are in somewhat balance, this will be the last thing I say with this slide because it's really important. One of the things that a lot of people do in this instance is they'll look at these caloric numbers and they'll try to do it with low carbohydrate dieting. The problem with low carbohydrate dieting in that instance is it's not necessary, but it gives you kind of a false reality, right? So it'll pull a lot of the water out of your muscle. And so in this example, the carbohydrate is actually providing some level of hydration within your muscles. And so when you're doing a body fat reading, you're getting a more correct reading. I don't know if I've explained that really well, but it sort of emphasizes why, you want it to be slow, right? Well, okay, one last thing of the last things is the scale should go both up and down. In fact, if the scale isn't going up, you're going to find that it's going to have trouble going down eventually. And that's what a lot of you guys are seeing that are on this like 1,500 to 1,800 calories and the scale's not moving and you've been plateaued for a while. One of the reasons is you've been, scared, you feel painted in a corner, and it's these up days and these up cycles that allow for the scale, your fat, all these processes to be done a lot easier. And I know that's counterintuitive to what a lot of people think they need to do to diet, but you can sort of see where we're periodically have you eating at a deficit, but the good majority of the time you should be thriving, and as long as you're thriving, like if you're eating 2,500, 2,700, 2,900 calories, you probably don't need to be as diligent about counting. When you're dieting and trying to get specific and seeing a specific result, then you probably want to be a little bit more specific, maybe using an app like MyFitnessPal or Eat This Much, which is one of the companies that we use for meal planning and stuff like that. So I hope this is helpful. It's sort of fun to be able to talk about this stuff in real life and get questions back. And so if you guys have any questions, feel free to just add them to the Facebook comments, and then we'll just kind of run from there. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.